recording, or I thought we were recording. It's about to record. Now we're recording. How you doing, Jack? Hope you had a good weekend. Nice to see you. Jealous of the Florida weather. It's a little bit chilly up here in Florida. Um, I'm pretty excited for this week. Um, Not trying to talk about politics at all, but it's the inauguration. That's just an exciting time. That's about it. We'll talk politics. We'll keep it moving. But I also actually have my first day of my semester starting tomorrow at Temple University. So it's my second semester at Temple. Um, and I used to teach at community college before that, and then high school before that. And it's my first semester completely online. So last semester we actually had plans to have sessions up until Thanksgiving in person. Everyone wearing masks, social distanced, and then basically like a real looking at like attendance extra if there's any outbreaks, notifying everyone who was in contact and really being cognizant of all of that. That lasted about a week before Temple seemed like they got scared and said, we're not doing this. There's a lot of like news stories around the country. And they kind of quickly reverted and said, we're going all online. So last semester we had about a week and a half of in person before we went online. Then we transitioned, did the rest of the semester online. This semester, they're going to have a couple classes in person, but for the most part, classes are going to be online. So my class is online, and from the start, it's going to be all online. So it's my first semester, all online from the first day all the way to the end. And honestly, kind of excited for it to see how it goes. I think online went pretty well last semester. I think transitioning after 2 weeks was a difficult part because we were expecting to be in person and then we had to switch it up. So that was a little difficult. But once we kind of got into the routine, I really don't think we skipped too much of a beat. I would say if I could see my students once a month, so one out of every like 9 sessions, I think that would be completely sufficient. I think like you'd need some in person, but really with like some practice and like some motivation, and it's not going to work obviously for every student. But for most of the students that I've been with, I feel like the semester's kind of gone pretty well, and I'm excited, I guess, like to test it out and see if my theory is kind of true.
Cool. Well, why don't you tell all of us what you're teaching at Temple?
So I'm teaching algebra. I basically teach like one of the lowest levels math. So it's a pretty big requirement. A lot of students have to take it. If you don't test out of math, you're going to be taking this. It's a requirement for a lot of business classes, a lot of liberal arts majors. Uh, it's a very popular class. Low level algebra, a lot of skill based, not too
Okay.
much lecture, I would say. So most people would probably think that's a difficult one to do online, but I feel like it went pretty well.
And cool. And so like less so about algebra because um, it's algebra.
Yeah.
But how do you think the environment's going to be being completely remote? Like, what does that do as like a teacher having to, control that classroom? It's something that people have been dealing with for a year now. From a more business side of it, I have a bit of a hesitation that this whole work from home attitude is truly a beneficial thing. Obviously, I think obviously there are advantages to it, but I also think that there are numerous disadvantages that are not being, there are disadvantages that are not being articulated. But I'd love to hear what your perspective is on the work from home and remote mindset, or the challenges that's going to have.
Definitely. I mean, I definitely see where it might not have the most benefit for some students. I also do think, though, that a lot of students or workers use it as an excuse to not do work. I'm not trying to pick out a lot of my friends or people that I see, But I feel like I see a lot of people go, oh, work from home, it's too hard. Oh, I have kids. Oh, I have distractions. Oh, I don't want to get out of bed. And really, what I see is excuses of not trying to work or not wanting to work. And it's definitely difficult to get around those. What I tell my students is like, get dressed to come to class. Don't wake up and come to class in your pajamas. Treat the class the same way you would treat a class in person. And if you treat it the same way you would do it in person, you're gonna get the same results, or at least similar results. If you come in your pajamas, if you don't even turn your camera on, if you don't do the problems as I'm doing the problems, it's not gonna really go as well. And like a lot of teachers, or I'm sure managers are using it as an excuse too. A lot of teachers, or at my old school, CCP, they made a lot of classes, or I think all classes this semester, asynchronous, which I think is pretty dumb. Basically, what they did was said, hey, I'm a teacher. I'm going to record a video. I'm going to assign 100 problems. And basically, I'm going to press go and the course just goes and they're going to get paid. That's not teaching your students. That's not looking at what they're doing. And that's not going to have results. So that, in my point of view, that teacher is giving up and they're not going to get results. I am meeting with my students, or when I met with my students at CCP, I met during every single class, even if we didn't have class. I met with office hours. I basically I came up with new strategies all the time to try and engage the students to try and see what they're doing. It's really easy for me to just do a problem and for you to watch over the computer and me to have no idea what's going on. But if you have a Huon drawing tablet, which is what I have, I'll pull it up right here. If you have one of these, you can see what I'm writing on a whiteboard in real time. You can share your whiteboard if you had a Huon drawing tablet, so I could see all of my students' drawing tablets in real time, which honestly is more than I could do in person. So I can see 30 screens at once. I can't do that in person. So that's like an advantage that's, I think, awesome, that you can do in real time.
But what about your students that they naturally would go to class in just their sweatpants or pajamas? Like you're telling them to treat it like they would, but in their minds, whether they're staying up late playing video games, partying, or just, binge watching whatever because they don't want to go to sleep. They wake up for class. Maybe they grab something to eat, maybe they don't. But they put on their sweatpants and they make their way there. So what about those students that are already, they're not deviating anyway. You're telling them to get ready for class, and there they are. Them popping out of bed and putting on sweatpants is the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what they were doing in a regular class, then I would say continue doing that. But I feel like if you're not taking something as seriously as you possibly can, then you can't really be too upset that you're not getting the results that you want. Um, so like I have nothing against those students, but I don't think those students have too much of a voice to say, "Hey, I deserve a better education." And maybe like try to adapt first. I think a lot of people too, like related to school and work from home and like and kind of not related, like people are so fixated that like because things are the way they've been for our whole lives, that's how they have to be for the rest of our lives. And it's like um, I feel like automation was coming to take most of our jobs within the next decade anyway. COVID really sped things up, but people are like with the restaurants, people are like, oh, how can you close restaurants? All these people need jobs. Those restaurants, in my opinion, were going to close in the next 10 years anyway. Most servers are going to get replaced by robots. Most cooks are going to get replaced by robots. Most,
Yeah, I'm going to disagree there. We are not 5-10 years away from that. That is
100% we are. And this is we were 5 to 10 years away from that without COVID, and with COVID, that's really speeding things up. We just last year had approval for delivery drones. Once you have delivery drones, like it's the I think truckers are like, I forget what percentage of workforce like truckers are, but like the whole trucking industry is going to be obliterated And people are like, oh, how can you close down restaurants? They need jobs. It's like, well, are we going to just have truckers even though we don't need them? Do we have people in toll booths even though we have Easy Pass? We kind of do in some of them for no reason. Last year, they converted all tolls to toll by plate in one day for COVID. Why don't they do that for without COVID? Because they're trying to save these jobs. But why do you save
Well,
a job that doesn't make sense?
well, I think that's a whole interesting conversation. But something you said that I want to talk more about is you said that your students that they complain that they deserve a better education than just a professor watching, demonstrating videos. What do you think the role of the majority of college and that formalized education really is in this day and time? Because I am of the belief that yes, you need to get higher education if you're going to become an accountant or an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or these like professional degrees that actually require a level of competence and some maybe a license or things like that. But for algebra, even for learning how to program, how to write code, how to write stories or how to be a journalist as a whole, and a number of different sciences and social sciences and things like that. I think that almost everything can be learned online. I think there's a wealth of information that are in either YouTube videos or blog posts or things like that. It's a bottomless hole of resources, and I, I've begun to believe that college is no more than a rubber stamp providing a credibility factor for you in the job market. But any student that complains that they're worth a better education, that's like Goodwill Hunting when Matthew Damon is like, you just wasted, tells the Harvard guy he's wasted a couple $100,000 on education he could get in a library, and that was 20 years ago. I think that's only magnified. So what do you what do you think your role is as an educator at this point? Obviously, you want to get your students a certain level of competency, but do you disagree that obviously there are exceptions to this, but the vast amount of information that people may actually need to have to be a productive member of society or pursue whatever ambitions they have can be obtained online for essentially free at this point?
Yeah, definitely. And this would be weird coming from me, but I I think the whole education system should be dismantled. I'm completely against it, like every aspect of it. I think school is more or less pointless after the age of about 14. I really don't see too much of a point of it as the way that it is. Um, the way I would have it is a lot more apprenticeship based, a lot more internship based, a lot more experience based, project learning, um, and all of that. Yeah, I think college is pretty dumb. I think it's at this point it's like it's a lot of nonsense. A lot of it's like, yeah, you're figuring out how to live by yourself and what you enjoy, but you don't need college for that. I think like a lot of skills you can get online. I kind of think companies are gonna overcome universities or kind of merge with universities at a certain point where like Google has their own certification program where if you pass this 12-week course, they say you're good enough to work at their company for these jobs. I think that's going to become a bigger and bigger thing. And I think school, like what I'm teaching, I don't want to say it's worthless because that would be really hard to keep doing what I'm doing. What how I feel like a little bit better about it is like I'm teaching my students how to learn and how to figure out a system and how to like strategically learn something and think about something, not necessarily how to just figure out equations.
So you said school is worthless, and obviously, according to what I said, I think there's a lot of overlap there. Something that I read a book on emotional intelligence over the summer, and something that really caught my eye is the amount of emotional intelligence that we develop as young people during our formative years of from preschool through really high school, and learning how to socialize with others and learning things like what empathy really means. And what the book kind of talks about is the students that from a young age, whether they're in starting really around preschool, the students that from a young age recognize that there's real value to them as a human being by allowing someone else to share the toys with them and basically expressing, because that's a form of empathy. That's a form of, I have something that's providing me joy. I am going to share this with someone else, even though the act of sharing is going to lower my benefit of it because I no longer have full domain over playing with these things. But the benefit of sharing and creating that interaction and bonding with that person is a net positive over any negative. And the reason I bring this up is I think that there's so much we can learn online. I think there's, it's really boundless opportunities. But at the same time, we are human beings. We are animals. And there is a social element to us that requires being refined and experimented with so that we can more comfortably fit into place. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about is like a side note before I hear what you say, or we get to jump more into it, is at least for me, and I'm 29 years old. There was always like a funny generalization of like the homeschool kids, like they're socially awkward, they don't know how to fit
Mm.
in, and things like that. And I'm sure there's a grain of truth to it, and I'm sure it's a overused stereotype. Um, but I think that is actually one of my biggest concerns for particularly school being remote, that so many young people, and not like high schoolers and college students necessarily, but like literally like the elementary school people and those young kids, the absence of being in an environment where they can actually socialize with people without a screen. I'm wondering whether there's going to be a COVID effect to them where in like 20, 30 years, there really is like a divide between people that know how to socialize and people that don't.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that, and I think you're right. Like there's gonna be there's definitely gonna be some lingering issues with COVID and socialization and students, but there was an issue beforehand too, like maybe not as prevalent, but there's a lot of kids who were really not happy in school. Um, and that's where school shootings, a lot of them come from. I'm not trying to say that like uh this is better for them, but there's a lot of kids who weren't happy in school. And I don't know what the numbers are and if there's more kids that are unhappy not in school, but it what there's benefits of being in school and socializing and all of that. There's also though a downside to that that needs to be like kind of seen also. And a lot of students like are feeling safer now. They don't have to go to school every day and be tormented, and they can only interact with their network online that they're comfortable with. And there's definitely some benefit there. And like the ones who really need to benefit or need to socialize, um, they can still socialize. No one's really stopping them. Or after COVID, let's say everyone's schooling from home, they can still socialize in other ways. Maybe it just doesn't have to be school. And then I also just think like there's a lot of benefits. I think the whole school system like should be changed. And like let's say we got rid of school for 14 years old up. Like I think the benefits, you'd save money. Um, yeah, you'd save a lot of money, which is what everyone really cares about. I don't like to care about money too much or think that I do, but there's a lot of money just wasted on schools.
So
No one says teachers are worth it. Everyone says like, oh, if you can't do anything, be a teacher. So like, no one really cares about student teachers. Everyone says that students hate school. Everyone says that students don't learn at school. So if you don't like teachers, you don't think they're learning, it's a lot of money. Why are we doing it? It seems
well,
it's babysitting, really.
yeah, and
It's
that's
babysitting, and it's doing something that we've done forever and just not questioning it.
Yeah, and there are obvious reasons why we have school. We do need to provide some type of structured education. We can't just purely, allow people to fend for themselves. There is some role in society, whether it's completely privatized, but there is a need for school in some regard. I don't necessarily know if that's really controversial, but the one thing that you talked about it being a waste of money is, I think, an extremely interesting conversation. I was talking to a friend about this, and I think one of the biggest problems we have is this attitude of going to college and people taking out these large amounts of debt and them being 18 years old and basically being able to go to the bank and say, "Hey, I want $100,000, $200,000 to go to college," and the college just writing blank checks. It doesn't matter if they're studying engineering or art history or philosophy or finance. It doesn't matter. These banks are just writing blank checks, and then same with a lot of the grad schools.
Hmm.
And at the same time, if that 18-year-old, regardless of background, went to the bank and goes, instead of $100,000 or $200,000, will you lend me 10,000? Will you lend me 5,000 to start this company or to help me grow this idea that I want to do? And all those banks across the board would say no. It would be a non-starter. But the return on investment from a $5,000 loan and giving someone the actual resources to pay for a website domain name and be able to start building a brand or experimenting with all these resources we have online, in my opinion, and I come from more of an entrepreneurial background, is so much more valuable than this blank check of go to college, follow your quote passion or what your parents tell you will make you money. And all of a sudden you're 21 years old, you're 100K in debt, and you realize you've been studying accounting. And the only reason you studied accounting is because math was the only class in high school that you didn't hate. And so I
Hmm.
think that is one of the biggest things that we need to try to figure out, that a 17-year-old doesn't have, can't vote, can't drink, can't buy alcohol or tobacco. But the second they're about to go to college, and if they don't turn 18, the banks will just write them a blank check for amount of the type of debt that can literally saddle them or anchor them to a job that they don't want to do, and they'll have to do it for the next 20, 30 years, because they have to make money. And I think that's like one of the biggest, most fortunates that we have, is that we have a huge swaths of young people that are being forced to make critical life decisions and being anchored by a level of debt that is just almost unbearable if you're not actually like entering a profession that will create a positive return on investment and a level of fulfillment to it.
Yep. So a couple things. One, you know why um, those loans are so easy to get for school and not easy to get for business?
They're guaranteed by the federal government.
Yeah, I feel like it's an easy fix. If they just don't guarantee it, we wouldn't have that problem. But it's a guaranteed return. You can't go bankrupt with it. So why not give $1 million loan if you know you're going to get it back? Um,
And just to add a little bit more there, to anyone who's like listening at home, you can research this. In I think the 1960s, maybe the early 1970s, is when the federal government actually passed legislation to guarantee student loan debts. And if you look at the charts, it's the same time where tuition at these universities really started increasing. So it's not, I wouldn't say a conspiracy theory or anything like that, but there are theories that the reason we've gotten into the problem we've gotten into is because the federal government has created a guarantee that has given the banks an opportunity to write blank checks, because it doesn't matter if the borrower, i.e. the student, actually pays it back, because the government will end up paying it back.
yeah, exactly. And then I kind of forgot what else I was going to say, but what do
Oh,
you,
sorry.
no, 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 it's all good. But what do you think is a solution to all of this then?
I think, and this is okay, so not that I want to get into politics, but I am very libertarian by nature. I
Hmm.
don't want the government being super involved in anything, because I think the government is more or less incompetent. And
Hmm.
like, take COVID. Like, I don't think we're completely disastrous, but I think we're pretty incompetent with how we've handled things. Nor do I know if I could particularly do better. I'm a little egotistical, so maybe I think I could. But I want to caveat with what I'm saying that like I understand like I'm kind of going against my beliefs here, but in my opinion, I think that every young person should be given or not. This is a utopian world, but should be given an opportunity to get like a seed investment. Maybe it's just like a couple $1,000s. Maybe it's $5,000. But you hear these stories of there was a city in Vancouver that went to homeless people and gave them like a $4,000 or $4,500 check, and it ended up saving the city $8,000 a year on emergency services because these homeless people were able to get their lives together by getting this lifeline from the government. And while that's with homeless people, I think that even young people, if the government were to say, hey, whatever you're interested in, don't worry about rent, don't worry about anything for a few months, but you're only going to get a few months. When you run out of this money, you run out of this money, but go online, figure out a way to make a dollar, be productive, and guess what? If you end up wanting to work a 9 to 5, or you want to work for someone else, or there's a calling that you have, or whatever it is, go for it. But here's a little bit of seed investment. Here's a couple $1,000s. Pursue your interest. I don't think pursue your passion is the best word, but pursue your interest, pursue your curiosity, and with the way, and I don't think this was possible 10 years ago, but with the way that for $10 a month or $14 a month, you can create a Shopify account. You can get a domain name or a website off GoDaddy and start selling your own clothing brands, your own shoes, your own handmade candles, whatever it is. You could be creating YouTube videos of whatever it is. I think with that seed investment, it gives people the opportunity to sit back and invest in themselves. And I think that's the most important thing, that people take the opportunity where they don't have a gun to their head and they don't have to be constantly worried about making money so they can feed themselves or whoever else the next week, so that they can actually sit back and they can go, what helps me wake up in the morning? Do I need to be surrounded by people? Am I comfortable just zoning out on the computer and getting in a flow state programming? Do I love that problem solving? Like, what is it that gets me going? Maybe there's an entrepreneurial thing to it. And so, I haven't fully thought this out, but I think the most wonderful thing we could give to young people, and really anyone as a whole, is the opportunity for them to not have to worry about short-term expenses, so they can pursue long-term growth. And I think a seed investment is one of the best ways that people can arrive at that situation.
I like that, and that actually reminded me of what I was gonna say before, so that was perfect. Basically, like the way college has become with everyone taking on so much debt, it's really stymied innovation, and that's why Peter Thiel, he has like the Thiel Fund, where basically you can apply for, I think it's $100,000 seed investment, and he basically is trying to have you forego college, because he's like, if you go to college, you end up learning and then you get in debt, and then you're so scared of this debt that you get a job and then you just get stuck in the job. And he's like, the reason America is so great is our innovation is because people, when they turned 18, you would try and start a business, and then you try and start another business, and like you wouldn't be so scared of this debt that you would come up with all these things and we'd have new businesses. But he's saying that that's really stopped because everyone's just scared of this debt, that we all just kind of revert to this easy, consistent 9 to 5 job instead of starting like cool stuff. So I definitely agree. I think like seed investment and really having people learn on their own would be more beneficial.
Yeah, and there's it's not for everyone, and it's not for everyone at the
Right.
same stage in life, but there are so many brilliant people out there that don't even know what they're capable of because they didn't have the right role models in their life. by no fault of themselves. They didn't have the right educators. They didn't have the people that like sat them down and were like, Jeremy, what like how do you think money is created? How do you think you can become a productive person in society? What is tomorrow and in 20 years from now going to get you excited to wake up and take on the challenges of life? And there's a lot more important questions that people should be asking themselves. But I I I, I think, and I'm someone who went to law school, that people make too many decisions because of the idea that, oh, they'll get paid in the future, and so they're just going to put their head down, take on this debt, and it'll work out in the end. And I don't think the numbers really pan that out. Law school, for instance, is completely oversaturated in my opinion. The vast majority of people that go to law school have about $150,000 worth of debt, and the average income of a law school graduate is between 50 to 70K a year. And that's not really a great recipe. If you're making $55,000 after spending 3 years in law school and you have $150,000 worth of debt, that is going to take you a ton. That's going to take you 30 years to get out from. And so, God forbid you find out in the first couple of years that being a lawyer isn't what's right for you, and then you meet someone, you start having a family. Well, guess what? Now you have more burdens. So, now I'm just kind of rambling, but I think young people aren't given enough opportunities to, sit back and like actually be given some guidance instead of just being put in this rat race of go ahead, go about your day, take on debt, make money, figure it out as you go. And I think it's problematic.
Yep, no, I certainly agree. And I wish I could comment more. If it's all right, I'm probably going to wrap this up because speaking of all of this school, I'm starting to get a little overwhelmed for my class tomorrow. I want to make sure I prepare and make it worth all of my students' money. As I say, this is all worthless. But we'll definitely we'll talk more about this. I think there's at least 3 topics that we like kind of brought up that I'd like to delve more into. And I think we're definitely going to be seeing all of this happen over the coming year anyway. So it's not something we can really run away from too much anyway.
Yeah.
But do you have any final comments or closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to ask you this. So, we're talking about people educating themselves outside the structures of a more formalized education. What resource or what have you found to be very helpful for you to continue to grow as a person outside of the classrooms, whether it's a website or just a practice that you've implemented in your life? How have you continued to educate yourself outside the classroom?
So I like that. It's a great question. And as you were asking, I was trying to think of an answer. And then one actually just like popped up perfectly. So yesterday I actually I just started training with a personal trainer. And basically was talking about it with my brother yesterday. I've had a coach for business now. I've had kind of a therapist, which I feel like is kind of like a emotional coach. I've had and now a personal trainer for fitness. And we were saying like, I think I'm capable of figuring out anything I really want, but it's really hard to wrap your head around everything and to always be thinking about it. And I think I can figure out how to get a 6-pack if I really wanted, but it's really hard to think of that at the same time of thinking of how to teach better, at the same time of how to invest better. So finding someone you look up to, like a mentor, and it can be someone you talk to, or it can be someone you just like find online and follow their steps. Doesn't have to be someone you interact with, but basically finding someone to kind of show you the way or follow their footsteps has been big. I think like until I was about 26, 27, I thought I was the best at everything. I still kind of do in some ways, but I realized like you're only going to get better when you look at people who are better and imitate them or try and follow some of their practices. So within like maybe 2 months, I'm going to probably take my shirt off for a couple of these podcasts and see if I have good results.
Okay, we'll be sure to record audio only for those ones.
Yeah. What about you? How do you continue learning?
I think the biggest thing is creating the habit of learning. And what I mean by that is I talk to multiple people about reading and reading routinely. And even if it's just 10 pages a day, and whether we actually do things with our lives or not, we think we live these busy lives. And the fact is, and I read this in Grant Cardone's book, that the 10x rule, time management is a terrible concept. It's just priorities. Like if your priority is to go to the gym, guess what? You're going to find time to go to the gym. If your priority is to eat healthy, you're going to find time to cook and do what you need to eat healthy. If your priority is staying in touch and calling your family or friends continuously, then you're going to find the time to talk to those people. And with learning, it needs to be the same thing. And one of the things that I've learned to do is to actually create routines, particularly in my morning and my evening routine, where time is set aside to reading, and I really only read nonfiction books, to reading a nonfiction book and having a minimum pages that I need to read each day and each week. And it can be really small. Like you don't need to be a meanie. You don't have to be a bully to yourself. It can be small. You only need to read 10 pages to start. And then you do that and you start building momentum and maybe you start doing it twice a day, 10 pages in the morning, 10 pages in the evening. All of a sudden you start reading a book every 2 weeks or something like that. And you start building momentum off of that. So in my opinion, whether it's that or some other productive habit, intentionally finding and creating habits and routines that allow yourself to consistently better yourself, whatever it is the real key to learning. It can't just be I want to read. It needs to be I'm going to read 10 pages in the morning before I look at my phone. I am going to read 10 pages in the evening before I turn on Netflix. I am going to do this instead of this abstract notion of reading is better and I want to read, a million books. And so I don't think anything else will work unless you do. And for me, it has been over the past couple of years, in order to increase my reading every day, morning and evening, opening the book and doing just at least a few more pages of reading so that I can finish that book, learn what it has to offer, and then get on to the next subject.
So with that being said, is there something you can think of that you learned this week? Anything that pops up?
Yeah, so I'm reading a Tony Robbins book, Awaken the Giant Within, I think it's called. And something that really struck me is we have positive values, things that we're striving towards, and we have negative values, things that, pains that we want to avoid. And if you spend the time to actually list out the most important positive and the most important negatives, so the things that you're striving towards, and then the things that you're intentionally trying to avoid, and you rank them in order of most important to least for both those categories, the positive and negatives, you can start to see if you are kind of sabotaging subconsciously yourself because you can't have the positive value of uh, growth or progress or things like that if you have like the negative of like fear of rejection. Like you have to be willing to make mistakes along the way if you're going to do things that are substantial and important. No one has ever done anything amazing. Like Thomas Edison, is famous for took him over 1,000 tries to figure out how to do the light bulb. Like he had to fail 1,000 times. And so if you want to make progress, you have to be willing to fail. So if you are afraid of failing, if you are afraid of rejection, then that is going to be more of a hindrance than your value of making progress or whatever it is. And so that was really interesting thing to do, to actually spend the time to do the exercise of what are the things that I strive most for in life and what are the things that I try to avoid at all times, and how could they possibly be in conflict? And so that was something really interesting that I learned this week.
I like that a lot. I'm actually gonna definitely look more into that and trying that exercise. I like that. That's super interesting. I don't have anything as interesting as that, but I just started reading The Ethical Slut about like polyamory. And I'll be mentioning some stuff about that. But I feel like that's going to be a growing trend. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's definitely interesting. And yeah, it's definitely interesting, but been reading about that and how to do it basically. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we look forward to learning more.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, nice talking to you, Jack. I will talk to you later in the week. Thanks as always. Have a good one, brother.
Awesome. Take care, Jeremy.
Bye.